Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm 1 week out from an event that will be at the Houston Police Academy, so that'll be on June 11th. So today I'm going to go over everything that I do in order to prep for a drift event. Now I'll show you all the basic items, and there's going to be a little bit of additional extra prep I'm doing as well. Because at the last event that I was at, I noticed that the rear of my car was a lot softer than I needed it to be. I went down a little too aggressively in the spring rates, and as a result, the back of the car was a little bouncier than I need it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and also install some heavier duty springs today. Now, every car is different, but for myself, I use the Shell Rotella. It's the T5 15W40 oil. This is something I've used for a long time and has worked really well for me. Again, for your own vehicle, use either what's recommended or what your engine builder recommends to you. Changing your oil, right? Duh, change your filter. This is a Toyota factory OEM spec D3 filter. Again, something I've used on every JZ and works great, have zero issues with it, keep on using it. Next up, toe plates. Now, these ones in particular are from Jegs. I'm sure you can get them from several other places. I was probably just buying a lot of stuff from Jegs at the time, and so I decided to throw these in for free shipping or something like that, who knows. But it's very important to note that when you are doing an alignment with toe plates like this, that you want to use two of the exact same tape measures. Not all tape measures are exactly the same, as dumb as that sounds. So it's really important that you're using the exact same ones to make sure you have accurate readings on each front and rear point in your toe plates. A digital level and or angle finder. So I'm actually using this to check the camber on the car in the front and rear. It's not a complicated process, but you will also need the toe plates or something that you know to be true and flat when you're doing this. I will show you later in the video. While this is not a part of your standard track day prep, I do have these 8K springs that I'm going to put on, and that's because I used 6K springs at the last event and they were just too soft. So I'm going to go ahead and go with these Silvers 8K springs in hopes to get a little bit more firmness out of the rear of the car and be able to put down that power just a little bit better. One thing worth doing is checking your oil before you actually go ahead and start draining the oil. And that's so you can go ahead and make sure that you're not burning any oil or have any potential leaks that you had not really noticed in the past. Again, also ideally, you would want to be checking your oil when the engine is hot. But considering this is a track car and I'm in the 3/4 range on my dipstick, I'm going to go ahead and say everything's great here. This is also a good time to go ahead and remove your oil cap, just so that way you don't get that glug, glug, glug effect when you're draining your oil, which will happen if there's a completely sealed oiling system. Oil change on my drift car is pretty much the same as any other car you're going to come across for the most part. I do have a Greddy magnetic drain plug right here, and then you can see in the back, right here is my Toyota OEM filter, which is actually attached to the Drift Motion sandwich plate, which is attached to the frame rail of the car. We'll start by draining the oil here and work our way over to the filter in just a minute. Now, whether you have a lift or if you're just laying under the car while the oil is draining, instead of taking a nap, this is a good time to come through and check all your inner and outer tie rods, sway bar end links, just basically do a good nut and bolt check all around, just to make sure everything is good and tight as you originally installed it. Since you did such a good and thorough job checking all the nuts and bolts on your front suspension, your oil should have come to a drip. I mean, realistically, you could sit here and watch this thing drip all day, or, it's good enough. So go ahead and wipe everything down real quick, rustle with the magnetic drain plug to get that sucker going again. And then we can go ahead and tighten that down as well. Now again, it's just a drain plug. Don't get crazy. Don't go shearing this thing off. But good and snug. Make sure you clean off the drain bolt as well as the washer. In my case, it's an aluminum reusable washer. So just make sure you clean everything up so that way, again, in the future, once you get the car back on the ground and you start it up, if you see a drip or two, you don't freak out, and having that just be like some kind of excess runoff oil from doing the drain. I apologize for applying a little bit of movie magic to this. I'm kind of notorious for over torquing, well, not over torquing, but very snugly putting on my oil filters. So I went ahead and loosened that up off camera. Now, once this thing starts to drain out a little bit, I go ahead and just let it drip like this for a while before I remove it completely. Now, I wasn't going to do this as I personally don't care about how clean or dirty this process is. But for those of you who have never seen this, if you use a plastic Ziploc bag, this is just a sandwich size bag, but obviously the bigger the bag, the better job you can do of this. If you use a Ziploc bag while you continue to take this off, you can really catch a great portion of the oil in the bag, which will help make your cleanup process go a lot smoother. So as you can see, there's a bunch of oil inside of the bag here. So pretty much killed it, kept my hands clean. Oil that's still in there is just draining into the pan now. Now I know it's just an oil change and you really are kind of just over it and want to get it finished and be on your way with the next part of the project. But one thing that I always recommend to do as well is just to, what is this called? Refilling. You can just go ahead and pour oil straight in there. You're priming it. I'm being messy. I have my funnel here. I could have, should have, would have used. Whatever. I'm not going to use it at this point. I'm already making a mess. Let's just go for it. Now you don't want to fill this thing up necessarily all the way, just because you're going to make a huge mess when it comes to actually installing it. I can see the level coming up, so I'm happy with where it's at right there. I guess it kind of goes without saying, you cannot prime a filter if it mounts in a downward facing position. Yeah, but clearly mine faces upward, so I can prime my filter, which I did. And one thing I always recommend as well is to always finish changing your oil while you are in the process of it. Don't move on to any other projects, because not that I've seen it done, but I've heard of it being done where people just, you get lost in the next thing you're working on and you go to fire the car up and forget there's no oil in it. So go ahead and let her drink. One other thing worth mentioning, I like to go ahead and put a little bit of this in with my oil. I can't honestly say that it's the end all be all, but it has not hurt my engine for certain. My engine I built myself a year and a half ago, and it's been going strong for the past year. I've got at least 10 or maybe 12 events on it, making 600 horsepower, 560 torque, and the thing just keeps humming. So again, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Just keep on doing what you're doing. Now, something that's just a really good practice to have is when you're filling your oil, make sure it comes up to the full mark right there on your dipstick. Whether you've primed your filter or not, once you go ahead and start the engine and let it get warmed up, it will bring that level down just a little bit, but that should have you definitely within spec to where it needs to be once you're all warmed up. With my oil level right where I need it to be, I can go ahead and put my oil cap back on and start the car up and let it warm up for a couple minutes. All right, so after ensuring that my neighbors still love me, and the car has had a few minutes to set now since it's been running, we'll do a final check on the oil just to make sure we're within range, which we're right at the halfway mark, so that's perfect. Great. All right, so now we've completed the oil change. Usually I'll go straight into doing my alignment with the toe plates and all that. However, I do have an extra step in today's process, which is putting in those 8K springs. So it's not a necessary part of track day prep. If you want to go ahead and kind of fast forward through this, I understand. I'll do the alignment after I put the new springs in. So without further ado, let's get these new springs in. I'll go ahead and spare you some of the more boring details. As you can see here, yes, this fender flare is attached to this door and the chassis. So I'm going to remove this fender flare, and then I also need to go ahead and obviously take off my lug nuts to access everything within. And then we'll kind of pick up there. All right, so clearly we're in the back of the car here now where we have to take off these 3 top hat nuts in order to free this up so it can come out the bottom of the car. And now from underneath the car, you can see where the strut mount is right here. So this bolt needs to come out and pass this control arm in order to free up the bottom half of the suspension here. Now when it comes to these coilovers, again, since these springs are the same size and this was correctly preloaded, so in other words, the spring was basically set into place and I gently brought these collars up until it just barely makes contact with the spring. And then I usually add just like a half turn extra just to make sure we're in here nice and snug. And that way the spring doesn't come loose and unbound and making a bunch of noise if your suspension completely unloads. So all we have to do to get this spring off of here is take off our adjuster knob and then this top nut right here. I'm gonna go ahead and clean these coilovers up before I reassemble everything, is because there's obviously a bunch of tire and everything in here. So we'll go and clean these all up before we do the final assembly. Now with our old spring off to the side and our new spring installed and everything is cleaned up and reassembled in reverse order that it was disassembled, there's one other thing I want to point out while this is all off right here is I use a marker and I mark up my collars as well as the mounting perch and this collar just to make sure all of these are still tight. Basically, if you see that this is mismatched from this or this is mismatched from this, then you know that something likely the spring is either coming loose if this is off, and if this is loose, there's a good chance that you're probably riding a little bit lower in whatever corner of the car that you have that installed at. Because if this is loose, there's a chance that this could rotate down into this body, creating a shorter suspension in that corner of the car. One other noteworthy tip here is I use this 2x4 just to support the suspension, so that way the brake line doesn't have too much tension on it. But also, if you put it under the 2x4, that is, if you put the 2x4 onto a jack, you can slowly raise the suspension, which will help allow you to center the bolts as you're coming up into the body. So it makes things a lot easier to do it that way versus trying to juggle holding the suspension up while also rotating the top hat, because that suspension gets pretty heavy pretty quickly. So now that we've got the coilover back in the car, all I have to do is put those three 12mm bolts back on the top hat, and this side is done. So as you would imagine, it's the exact same process for the other side of the car. With the suspension now all installed in the car, something I like to do, regardless of what was just performance suspension, is always double check your measurements from the top hat to a known point on these coilovers, whether it be where the bottom of the split the lock ring is, or the split between both of them, and then also measure down here to where either the locking collar here is or the mount right here is, and then compare it to the other side to make sure that they are the same. Again, this is a better suited task when your sway bar is disconnected, so that way we have a true measurement on both sides. Now lastly, when you're adjusting heights, all your height adjustment should be coming from right here. You're going to go ahead and loosen this guy up, and once he's nice and loose, you can go ahead and thread the shock body up and down into this mount right here. Now I'm going to go ahead and lower this about a 1/4 inch because this is a stiffer spring, and I honestly just wanted the car a little bit lower in the rear in the first place. So I'm going to start with a 1/4 inch lowering here and work my way from there. Again, you'll have a final measurement will be from this point to your top hat will be the same on both sides. So moving on to the alignment, right here with the toe plates, what you're going to want to go ahead and take note of is you just want to make sure that the plates are flush up against the wheel and or tire on either side, and as well as the adjacent side. And you take your two tape measures and pull them taut, and you will be able to get a measurement, and that'll be your total toe in or toe out. Next up is checking camber with this digital level. So what I like to do is put the level near to the wheel and zero it out. And then once it gets zeroed out, you just take it and hold it firmly against here, and you can go ahead and get what your camber is. Now the camber obviously is not 85.6 degrees, it's less that from 90. So that would bring the total camber to 4.4 degrees in this case. Some other things you want to keep in mind is if you just freshly installed suspension like we did today, you're going to want to go ahead and make sure that the suspension is well settled before you go and take your measurements. So I'll usually kind of push on the car like this, and I'll roll the car forward and backward to make sure the tires aren't binding or are binding in a natural way, depending upon my toe situation. So roll the car back and forth a few times, bounce a few times, roll the car back and forth a few times, bounce a few times, and then you can go ahead and start getting your measurements. One last thing worth noting is toe plates will check your total toe, front to front, rear to rear. But realistically, if you don't have a true alignment on your car, you could be crab walking. So it's recommended, obviously, to, if you have a string alignment system, to get a true alignment that way. Or you can go to an alignment shop. Around here, the go-to place is Texas Tires and Parts with Rudy Martinez. And you can go ahead and get an alignment there as your solid baseline. And from there on out, as long as you're not absolutely just going off track and hitting a bunch of things and randomly, like, you know, dooring other people to the point where you're bending arms and tie rods and stuff like that, then you can pretty much manage a toe plate alignment from there on out. Otherwise, this is just really something you want to like strictly use for a track only type car, so that way you don't get this crab walk effect where the car is, everything's lined up and it looks like it's good, but you're driving sideways down the road, you know? All right, so we've got fresh oil, we've got fresh suspension in the rear, and now I've got a fresh alignment. Now, one would say I could just take this to the track and be good to go. And likely, yes, that is the case. However, I always do take my car out, go around the block, let go of the steering wheel to make sure it continues to track straight and make sure everything's in good shape. So let's just take it around the block real quick to make sure everything's good, and we can park it and it'll be good until next week. Oh, just like that, I'm ready for another track day. So if you're in the Houston area, this is an invite as well. On June 11th at the Houston Police Academy, IAS is hosting an event, and I will be there testing this car as round 3 of Lone Star Drift will be at the Houston Police Academy. So if you see me, come on out, say hi. I'll have t-shirts and stickers and all sorts of stuff like that as well. So feel free to swing by. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next episode.